Gerson. Thank you. Thank you to London for this nice space and to have us today. My name is Tim Gerson. I am the senior U.S. critic for Screen International, and I'm very happy to be here today to do this Q&A for Pillion. First, please join me in welcoming writer-director Harry Lighton. And please now join me in welcoming the stars of Pillion, Harry Melling and Alexander Skarsgård. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. This is, it's such a lovely, lovely film. And I want to start with Harry Lighton in terms of, so the book that this is based on was set in the 1970s. And I have heard you talk about that you tackled this adaptation in several different ways to start off. Ancient Rome, I believe, was one version. On a cruise ship was another one. It is funny because when I first saw this movie at Cannes, when it premiered there, I didn't know that backstory, because when I watched the movie, it seems so natural to have it in the present time. But I'm curious the course that you took to end up where the film is now.
Yeah, it's interesting you describing it as like a lovely, lovely film, because I love that. It's a very nice description, and it's actually like, that wasn't a gag, I love it, it's nice, but I think that like that really roundabout way of getting to what it currently is was like battling with trying to find an environment, like a precinct, which would be able to combine like loveliness and grit and like, you know, hardcore elements. And I was initially quite like, the book is set in 1970s Bromley and a gay bike gang, and I was kind of off-put by the socio-political context of what it meant to be like a gay guy in Britain in the 1970s. And so I wanted to like get away from that by, you know, finding an environment where they wouldn't, you know, the love story wouldn't be kind of up against that barrier of prejudice, and so that doesn't really explain why I went to ancient Rome, because there were obviously other prejudices in ancient Rome. But I thought like setting it in a gladiator school could be fun and definitely hot. And then
just ask one thing. Did you write a full script?
I wrote 40 pages, and then I sent it to my producer, who was, I think described it as like, you know, just plain porn rather than like porn with elements of drama. And then the cruise ship one I wrote an entire draft of and really liked, actually, but I'd already had one full start trying to make a feature, which the budget had been like, my idea had essentially been like way beyond what you can do as a first-time filmmaker. And then I learned that like when you shoot in a cruise ship, you have to pay like a crazy deposit a year before, and it's like famously the most expensive environment to shoot on. So I bailed on that, and then yeah, returned to the book, but moved it up into the present for those kind of aforementioned reasons, and from that point on, it moved quite quickly.
Because the Colin character is so, obviously both characters are so important, but I feel like we see the movie through Colin's eyes, obviously. And I'm curious about both writing the character, obviously basing on the book, but writing the character for present day, and then deciding that Harry Melling was right. That there's a quality that he had. I guess I'm curious what that quality might have been, beyond just the great performances he's given in his career. Just, was there something sort of ineffable about Harry Melling that you just felt like, he's my guy, he's right?
Definitely. It had less to do with updating it to the present, that actually, and more to do with the fact that I knew that like I wanted Colin to be a low status character, like necessarily he had to be low status, but but I'm about to say something nice, which is that, but that he needed to be like incredibly charismatic and brilliant, and
keep doing it.
And yeah, I'd seen Harry in a couple of things and found that like you know, specifically, actually, I watched a film which I'm going to forget the name of now, called The Devil All the Time.
That's it,
Yeah, which Harry plays like an evangelist preacher in it, and it's, you know, it's kind of like you're only there for like 20 minutes of the film, but I was like totally captivated by someone who was quite like a marginalized peripheral figure in the film, and then I watched all of his work, and that was the kind of consistent thing for me, was that like I was like hungry for the moments when he was on screen, even though, and Harry might disagree, but even though as I saw it, he was playing quite like marginalized characters who were like up against in some way not like fitting into the kind of metrics whichever society in the film was representing had like demanded of men in that time. And so yeah, I knew that he had the minerals.
So I guess I want to ask that for you, Harry, in terms of this idea of reading the script and sort of being captivated by it, and the character, this idea about him being marginalized, was that something that you felt in terms of reading it, in terms of who this guy was, understanding who he is? Because as I said, I feel like Colin's such an important character because we do see the movie through his eyes, and when he gets into this relationship, we have to understand why Colin is invested in it, you know, because otherwise, the bad version of this movie is that we're like his parents who say, what's he doing with this person? This is a terrible idea. And the movie doesn't do that. And much of it is because of your performance. I guess I was wondering about, was that part of the internalizing in terms of playing the character, that you knew that the responsibility was, I need the audience to understand what this means to Colin and why he cares for somebody who is, you know, in this dynamic, in this type of relationship.
Yeah, I think very early on we spoke about Colin having this stubborn optimism was the word we coined, and that was a really useful thing to constantly remind myself through going through his journey in the movie, that we meet him and he hasn't really happened, you know, he hasn't really, he's not lost, but he just hasn't yet found the thing that's gonna set him alight, and yet he wants it, you know. It's not like he's not choosing to go for it. He desperately wants to find this thing that is gonna make him come alive. Then along comes Ray, and it's exciting. It's really, really exciting. It's not in any way, although of course the dynamic is complex and interesting, but it's very important at all times that we feel that Colin desperately wants this to work, and he's excited by this relationship. He's excited by Ray and about being a sub in this dynamic, and that's the thing I kind of held on to throughout the whole filming of it. So it never became sort of abusive or you know, I think you're not worried for Colin. I mean, you at moments you are, I guess, but you're not sort of like overly concerned thinking, oh no, where is this really going, because he's up for it. And hopefully that's something that allows an audience to really hopefully invest in the relationship, because he's just besotted by this man. So that was really the thing that I kind of held on to throughout making it.
For Alexander, I just love the idea of playing a character who has no backstory and really has no, we don't learn anything about him beyond anything that we see in the film. And I've seen in other interviews that you talked about the fact that you kind of found that freeing. It sounded like you didn't have to even think about a backstory. I don't think did you spend time thinking about who this guy was before we saw him on screen?
Oh, it's terrific for an inherently lazy actor. No, I think I created some sort of backstory for him, where in pre-production I was thinking a bit about where he was coming from and his background and all that, but it also kind of changed. And even as we were shooting the movie, I was like, no, that probably never happened to Ray. Like, I think this is the guy. And it kept shifting as we were progressing through the storytelling, which was quite exciting that that it wasn't like set in stone, that the process of shooting it was, but also because we hadn't done any prep together, Harry and I. So it wasn't one of those where you spent weeks rehearsing or you sit around the table and discuss the relationship. It was a discovery that we all made in front of the camera, and that was quite exhilarating. And I did definitely learn a lot, not only about the relationship, obviously, but new things about Ray. There would be moments that in pre-production that when I was sitting working on the script, I thought like, oh, this is going to be a pivotal moment, or this is going to be something impactful, and then we shoot it, and I'm like, I felt nothing. That was just very kind of transportation, and then the opposite, moments that I thought would be more kind of pedestrian was suddenly like supercharged, and I would feel something, and something would happen between Harry and myself, and I'm like, whoa, that took a surprising turn, or like that's a dream when you're working, when you have those moments. It's really, really exciting.
My impression I've gotten from previous interviews for both of you as actors, neither of you love a lot of rehearsal, just in terms of your projects. And if I'm mistaken, please correct me. But if that is correct, it seems like in a lot of ways, like what you're talking about, Alexander, this is all discoveries. Obviously, there's a lot in the script, but if you're not rehearsing a bunch beforehand, there's so many opportunities throughout the film of figuring out or sort of surprising maybe each other in terms of the performances and the rapport that the characters develop.
Yeah, and I'm not. Some actors are dogmatic about never rehearsing or never running lines and stuff. I find it useful to, like, especially if it's dialogue heavy, I find it useful to run lines with the other actor or just with someone else, but like to kind of say it out loud. If it's dialogue heavy, but I tend to not. I don't love to get it on its feet, like go up and like block it or play around with it and actually get into the emotional state of it. I find I'd rather, again, save that exploration for when the camera's rolling.
Yeah, sometimes, I mean, in certain jobs you have to have lots of discussion prior to it, just in the nature of the scenes or what you're trying to achieve to make sure everyone's on the same page. But for this, it felt like certainly my character is very much discovering what this relationship is, working out where Ray is the entire movie. And so actually not having much conversation prior was great, because you are sort of second guessing, oh, is that, oh yeah, that worked, so it was a perfect way of engaging the material, I think. And again, also when you haven't spoken a lot about, oh, this moment is the moment where, it means that you have the opportunity for that moment not to be there. Do you know what I mean? Like if it doesn't happen on the day, you're not going, oh no, because it just didn't happen. And sometimes you can sort of get stuck when you're like, no, this is the moment where we said, this is the big, whatever. And so it's nice to have that freedom in discovery and going, oh no, actually this is the moment that we need to pay attention to.
Because the idea of not having rehearsals, and I completely understand what you both are saying. I watched it again this week in preparation for us talking, and I had somehow completely forgotten the incredible wrestling scene where you lift him up, and I thought, is that one take? How did that? It's really impressive. And
that was the only thing we actually rehearsed. And that was the first time we met, rehearsing that scene. So we met on the mat, shook hands and got into it.
In a different way, there's a lot of conversation, I feel like, these days about, I think especially among younger viewers, about why do we have sex scenes in movies? They're so irrelevant. They don't further the story. And one of the things I love about your movie is that the love scenes in the movie are so integral. They're so emotional, they're so character driven. We learn things about the characters through these things. I guess I want to ask all three of you about this. I guess I want to start with Harry in terms of writing those scenes. I know you had an intimacy coordinator as well, but just figuring out the emotions and what's happening character-wise in those scenes. Because they're romantic, erotic, sexy, all of that, but there's also like this really strong emotional component that's going on. I guess in terms of writing it and then putting it on film and actually doing it, that process. I'd also like to talk to the two of you in terms of coming together and figuring out these very important scenes in the movie.
Yeah, I think as soon as I took on the project, I knew that like it is in part about like the role which like transgressive sex has in someone's development of self, and so like those scenes were kind of core to the skeleton of the film, and also like I found them kind of not easy, but like amongst the easier scenes to write, because so much of Colin and Ray's relationship is about like a kind of like an ambiguity in what's being said between each of them, or like Ray withholding information from Colin, and those scenes are in some ways the only times in the movie when actually there's like a real clarity between them in terms of like information being passed and received. And in terms of the writing of it, my kind of strategy was to like overwrite it so no one would be under any misapprehension who read the script that it was going to be like it was going to be like detailed sex. And I remember being told before I sent it out to the actors to like pull back in some places. There was like a description in the first scene in the alley of like the blowjob where I think I'd written like he fucks him in the back of the throat like he's taking a swab. And and
That was still in the draft that I read.
well, I mean, I must have fought for it, I guess. I was keen that like we wouldn't con ourselves or any collaborators or financiers as to like what the sex would be like, and that the sex would be like very story heavy. I think that like all the sex scenes, but if you take like the orgy scene in the woods, for example, there's like four different kind of character dynamics going on there, and there's like a real kind of traditional story arc to that scene. So yeah, I enjoyed writing them, certainly.
And for the two of you, it's such an intimate thing, but I guess I was curious in terms of just because there wasn't a lot of rehearsal, as we've discussed, in terms of working on sets with the intimacy coordinator. Is that just sort of finding those character moments in a situation like that?
I think it was great, because I think what I was so excited about was sometimes you read a script and you go, oh, this is the sex scene. This is the bit where we have the sexy moment. But what felt so good about this script was that, like you said, you needed those scenes in order to understand the next sort of half an hour of the movie, right. And then another moment of intimacy to understand the next half an hour. It really supported the story at all times. And Harry spoke about making them quite clumsy, quite awkward, quite authentic in that sense. Yeah. And that again is a very exciting thing to play. So you're not, in a way I would have been more nervous if it was like us trying to be. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. I would.
I'm not an actor, but I imagine that there's some liberating about it can be awkward and clumsy.
Oh,
it doesn't have to be this ideal version of what sex is supposed to be.
Yeah, and the way they shot it, it wasn't like close-ups on certain hands sort of grasping at sheets and things like that. It was just very much on these people and what they were, how they were communicating with each other. So I loved it.
So did I.
I want to also ask Harry, in terms of, because sometimes actors gain a bunch of weight, lose a lot of weight for a character to kind of become the character, but I feel like something like shaving one's head is something that is not talked about as much. And I was trying to think, and forgive me if I've forgotten something that you have done where you've had a shaved head before, because I guess I was curious about how that changes, because you look at yourself in the mirror and you look different as a person. Did that in some ways help you figure out the character or how to play the character?
I think it massively did. I think it was on the second day of shooting that we shaved it off, and it was a wonderful. Sometimes when you have visual things that happen to you, aesthetic things, and you look different, it's an amazing asset to have as an actor, because you're sort of rediscovering that thing, and you're going, okay, this is where he's heading. Do you know what I mean? And you have that in the back of your head, and it was a wonderful thing to know, because there is a sort of very interesting edginess to him that suddenly occurs. A sort of he becomes somewhat more not severe, but there's a sort of there's an aggressiveness to the look of it, which is actually quite interesting with someone that you meet and is so soft. And that was lovely, and in a way it charted his journey into Colin knowing not exactly what, but more having a better idea of what he wanted out of being in a relationship, and who he is as a person, and what he desires, and why he feels this dynamic is a dynamic that's going to work for him. So those key sort of aesthetic things are really useful, I think.
Yeah, and for Alexander, I had watched a previous interview that you had given about this film, and you talked about something that I had never even thought of, which is it really just the day off scene, the sequence, which is really just terrific, and then there's that kiss that happens, and then Ray vanishes, and the thing that you talked about, which it never occurred to me, was what's the reason why Ray is doing that? Is he doing him a favor, essentially, by saying, we're not right for each other and I'm going to vanish? Is there something sort of cruel and calculated in terms of that? There are different ways we could interpret what happens. And I don't know if that was ever a discussion that the three of you had about, because I like that it's ambiguous. I love that we don't know why he left. But I guess for you, Alexander, because the character didn't have a lot of backstory, and this is also a mystery at the end, did you have an answer for yourself in terms of playing that scene with Harry and that kiss and the tenderness that happens in that moment?
I had an idea of what I thought it meant to Ray, yeah. It didn't align 100% with how I felt when we shot it. Again, back to kind of being surprised. But in interviews, and talking to people who've seen the movie, it's been quite interesting how people interpret that sequence and Ray's intentions in setting up that kind of the day that is like a Richard Curtis rom-com trope montage. And of course I never answered the question or like talk about what went through my head in prep or how I felt on the day, because that would just kill the fun of watching it, because, or the fact that people can respond to it different ways. Or it's great if people walk out of the cinema and like, well, no, to me that meant that way. Oh no, you're completely wrong. Of course, Ray felt that way, this way. But yes, to answer your questions, I had a kind of a clear idea of why Ray would do this, yeah, and then I changed my mind a little bit.
And then for Harry Lighton, when the movie premiered in Cannes, and since then, the reviews have often said like, oh, it's a subversion of the romantic comedy, and talking about the tropes, and even like you said, the Richard Curtis, when you're writing it, going back to the beginning, was that an intention? Because I feel like a lot of people who've seen it put that on the film, but in terms of writing it, making it, talking to your actors, was that part of the ambition of what you were trying to make?
I think like certainly didn't discuss it with these guys. Well, actually, the day off it was, you know, we talked about wanting it to have a like slightly fantastical, like syrupy quality, which I think is consistent with like a Richard Curtis rom-com. But what I always knew was that I wanted the film to kind of hug the audience as much as it might like confront them, you know, people who aren't familiar with the kind of sex or that subculture. There's going to be scenes which are like confronting and maybe hold them at a distance. I wanted to like combat that by having the film be like sweet and fun, and by having music and sort of stuff which like allows an audience to kind of sink into a film. And I think that's, in essence, that's like comedy and romance are two of those sort of syrupy things until you dig a bit deeper beneath either of them, particularly romance. And so then like thinking about the rom-com structure and how a relationship like this doesn't necessarily fit into that structure, or at certain points anyway, butts heads with it, you know, that led to scenes like the dinner scene where they go round for lunch with the mum and dad, which is like such a staple of a rom-com. But you know, when you have someone like Ray, it's not a great idea to bring your boyfriend over for lunch. So it was fun in those moments, being able to like be slightly kind of meta in the way we were playing with genre elements.
And just say really quickly, I love that scene because there's such a realness to it, and the mother sort of wanting to know, like, you know, is this person, you know, what's his deal? Is he like a serial killer or something? There's such a rawness and a realness, and just to have the fact that the mother is dying as well. I don't know if that was anything that was in the book or something that you brought to it.
No, it's not in the book, that, and I wanted there to be like an urgency to why a parent who's so supportive of their son would put pressure on him to, you know, define his relationship more clearly to her. And then I also wanted there to be like a very, you know, maybe it's universal is the wrong word, but like the death of a parent is a pretty common experience, one which like most people will experience in their lives. And I wanted there to be like a very universal element to Colin's experience in the film, which would then sit alongside a relationship which like few people in the audience might have direct experience of. So again, like your average audience member wouldn't be able to discount what Colin was going through emotionally and leave the cinema, because then there'd be something which they would have like an affinity with.
Like I said, I think this movie, I understand what you're saying, but in terms of it being lovely, but I do think this movie is just.
No, I took that as a compliment. To be
No,
clear.
yeah, I know you did. I think what you all have done is make something that it sneaks in as a rom-com and then just sort of shows this whole world that we often don't see in movies, and it has such humanity and such grace and such beauty. So I want to thank all three of you for the film, and thank you for being here today.